So the romanticism of mental disorders has always been a thing that people did and has always been a problem. That one era where everyone made depression seem like it was some dramatic aesthetic lifestyle. Like we've literally went from saying that mental disorders don't exist to now glorifying them and saying that they're the coolest things in the world, but anybody with an actual disorder would tell you otherwise. Now, again, this has always been a thing that people did, but people are noticing a rise specifically on TikTok of people romanticizing mental disorders and also just social media in general. And of course, this brings about a lot of people on YouTube who bring these conversation up, and the YouTubers end up making videos about these videos, normally putting them in a compilation where they go through people who are seemingly faking disorders and they'll make fun of them, they'll call them out for it so that we can stop this nonsensical romanticism of something that it should not be romanticized. So it can also stop watering down the experiences of actual victims of these mental disorders. Now, in hindsight, this all sounds great, right? Except for one thing. How do we actually know that the people we're calling out is faking a disorder? Now, in this video, I'm not really going to be taking specific clips from either the YouTubers nor TikTokers, nor am I going to pick out like a certain person or YouTuber or something like that and choose someone specifically to talk about. The reason for that is because I feel like what I'm about to say is a very like a natural human error type of thing. And I want this to be more of a gentle reminder than to be punching down on other creators and other people. I think we've all gotten really comfortable with humiliating and basically bullying other people on the internet. And for certain things, you could argue it's deserved or whatever. But I'm trying to take a more empathetic approach with the way that I consume content on the internet before I say stuff or jump to conclusions, because I do notice that I also can be insensitive about certain things in the way that I talk or say things as if I've never made a mistake like that before. This video is really just showcasing human error and how we all do it. So yeah, I'm not going to focus too much on one creator or use too many clips, simply because I don't want this to be some big bullying fest. But I'm sure you've seen videos of, or TikTok videos of people sharing their disorder attacks or something, whether or not they're real. And YouTubers also commenting on that and talking about it. You can find plenty of videos in the thumbnail that I have. You'll see plenty of examples as well, just so you know that they do exist. But I'm not going to be using too much of their content or talking about anyone in particular. Now, just a quick disclaimer. I'm not a psychologist. I'm studying it currently in college, but I'm not licensed. I do not have the degree. What I say in this video is going to be based off of my own research, my own experiences, and also the information that I got from my professors who are actual therapists, actual psychologists, blah, blah, blah. But just for context, for anybody who may not know, psychology is a fairly new science, and it was only just recently recognized as an actual science in 1879. Now, obviously, I know that doesn't sound incredibly recent, but compared to other sciences, like, say, physics, that was studied in the 4th century by Aristotle, or astronomy that was studied like 1000 BCE, it's a pretty new science, relatively new to the other sciences at least. There is still a lot that we don't know and understand about psychology, the mind, the psyche, the way it works, and mental disorders especially. So it makes sense that there would be some confusions when we're talking about mental disorders and people having them and the way that people perceive them on the internet. But to talk more on TikTokers just in general, yes, there are a lot of people who will make these really shallow quizzes and personality tests that's like, oh, if you get this score, that means you have this type of trauma or this type of mental disorder type of thing. A very common one tends to be ADHD, or an attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. In the simplest definition, this disorder affects people's behaviors in a way that makes them hyperactive, impulsive, and inattentive, and have problems focusing. Again, just a very basic definition. It's a lot more complicated than that, but this is not supposed to be a whole psychology class. So ADHD is one of the more common disorders that people do actively have, but also the ones that are faked a lot as well, because it's very easy to get the symptoms mixed up with just daily, everyday occurrences versus someone who actually has it. I should have ketchup. For example, sometimes you'll see people doing some kind of TikTok trend or dance, and in the middle of it, they'll pause and they'll look all distracted and like their eyes will wander and look somewhere else. And then they might say something or put something on the screen like, oops, my ADHD kicked in. Those types of things are a lot more simple and also a lot easier to spot if it's fake or not, or if it's forced in some type of way, because it's the most stereotypical and generalized thing to do and say when you're talking about ADHD. Kind of like the ooh squirrel thing. Although yes, like people with ADHD may do that. It's like the most shallow level of what ADHD actually is. So you can tell it's just very forced the way that they're trying to do it. Also, ADHD isn't something that can just kick in. It is constantly affecting your behaviors and your moods, your actions, your thoughts 24/7. So it doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. So things like that, people will kind of point out and be like, that doesn't look right. And a lot of times they will be right. Because again, in that case, that's a very easy one to spot because of how shallow their understanding of ADHD actually is. But other times, and for other disorders, for example, Tourette syndrome, that one isn't always so easy to point out whether or not they're faking it. And in some of the example videos that I put up on the screen, again, I'm not going to use any specific clips. You're free to go watch the videos if you want. Some of them may call out some of these people and may be like, oh, that doesn't look like actual Tourette's, or that doesn't look like they're having an actual tic attack. But they might actually have that condition and we just don't know for sure. Because the thing about mental disorders is that they're kind of difficult to diagnose, even for a professional. The DSM-5, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, they really squeeze a lot in that acronym there. It's a lot more words to it than just DSM. But the DSM-5 is the official guide for psychologists to diagnose people with certain mental disorders and conditions. When I took my abnormal psychology class, my professor was actually able to bring one into class, and we all got a chance to look through it and read it. And it's just like this big list of criteria and certain categories that you fit in for each disorder. So the book is meant to help diagnose someone based on their symptoms and what category they're in according to the disorder. But even with this book being used by professionals, misdiagnoses happen kind of frequently, actually. There was a study done one time where there was like 840 patients who were brought in and diagnosed with certain disorders, and a very large percentage of them for each disorder was actually misdiagnosed. So it's very common to be told that you have one disorder, but you really have another, or you might not even have one at all. So it is kind of difficult to pinpoint certain disorders sometimes in certain people, which is why most of the time professionals and just people in general will tell you not to go diagnosing yourself because you could be very wrong. However, when they say this, they most likely mean just don't go waltzing around telling people you have OCD if you weren't clinically diagnosed and you really just diagnosed yourself by watching TikToks. Now, TikTok technically is a form of research if we're talking about understanding symptoms of a disorder. Is it reliable research? Probably not. There are definitely people on there who are telling the truth and actually have that disorder so they can speak on their own symptoms. And again, a lot of other people who fake it and lie. But it can be a first step to actually getting an idea of, maybe I do have this issue. So that's when you would try to do more research, go online and look up some things. I mean, there's so many resources you can find online where professionals post things all the time, blogs, articles about certain mental disorders and their symptoms and stuff like that. That's when you would do more research instead of just relying on a TikTok video. Once you've done all that and you got a pretty good idea that like, hey, I think I might actually have this problem, then you would go to a professional. But the problem is a lot of people don't get to that last step because they just don't, or they simply can't. Getting a diagnosis can be difficult and also expensive for a lot of people. A survey done, I believe, in like 2022, or it might have been 2023, I can't remember, but a survey done noted that around 60% of Americans actually has their insurance cover things like therapy, psychiatry, and stuff like that. So just to play the devil's advocate, I can understand if a lot of these people can't go to a professional, so they just end up trying to self-diagnose. And technically, to a degree, you do have to self-diagnose in order to understand that there's something wrong with you in the first place, or at least just get an understanding of certain behavioral issues that they've been having. Because these things don't just happen overnight. You don't just get ADHD one day and that's just how that works. They progress over an extended period of time. So many people may not realize that there is something a little bit off about their behavior until they see other people talking about it. Then they realize, oh my goodness, I've been doing that all my life. And then they kind of have that epiphany moment. So all this yapping to say, I don't think a lot of the people on TikTok are maliciously faking these disorders because they genuinely could have it. Could watching TikToks amplify those symptoms and give kind of a placebo effect? Yeah, I think it could. And again, TikTok should definitely not be your primary source when you're trying to understand certain things about your behaviors and whether or not you think you have a mental disorder. But it could be a start for a lot of people because they realize if they have symptoms that other people have of the same disorder with those symptoms, then they could possibly have that same issue. Which is something else that I've seen YouTubers say sometimes is when they'll watch people, whoever claims that they have a disorder, and they watch them have their symptoms, say like Tourette syndrome or OCD or something like that. Sometimes I've heard a few of them say, well, I have OCD and mine doesn't look like that, so I don't really know if this is real. While we have a very general idea of what each mental disorder's symptoms are, there's always going to be variation. Not every person with the same disorder is going to look the same. If your ADHD doesn't affect you the same way that another person with ADHD does, that's fine. That's completely normal. You're not all supposed to act like clones of each other. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they could be lying if they have different behavioral functions than you. Autism spectrum is a perfect example of this. A lot of psychologists, and I know my abnormal psychology professor said this too, is that no two people with autism looks and acts the same way. That's the reason why they call it a spectrum. So seeing people have different tic attacks or tic timings than you when you're Tourette syndromes doesn't necessarily mean they're lying or they're forcing it or they're faking it, because those are going to be different sometimes. And Tourette syndrome is one of the ones that I've seen a lot of people being like, I don't know if they're actually real or not. And again, that's a valid criticism because it can be simple to fake, but the reasons of why is like, oh, well, that doesn't look right. You know, the tic attacks aren't far apart enough or something like that. And it's like, yeah, but not everybody with Tourette syndromes looks exactly the same way. They could just genuinely have different symptoms, and we just need to learn more about them. It's why we continuously update the DSM-5, the reason why we have a 5th edition. And therapists and psychologists have to constantly renew their licenses and keep up to date with new research and experimentation, just like any science does. So this whole conversation was to showcase the fact that calling people out for faking mental disorders on the internet is really only helpful if you know for sure that they are faking it. In which, yeah, they should be called out. But for some of the people that I've seen some of these YouTubers react to, in my opinion, looking at them, it's kind of hard to tell whether or not they're actually faking it like they claim they are. And we could be getting it wrong and having everyone look at a person and make fun of a person and humiliate them on the internet for faking a disorder when they might actually have it. And I don't expect them to go get their medical records to show to everybody to prove that they actually do have it. But it could be harmful calling people out for things that we think they're faking when they might not actually be. Because then what that also could do is have other people afraid to acknowledge certain symptoms that they have, or even ignore them and bypass them because they don't want to be called a liar. They don't want to be called somebody who's just faking a disorder when they could genuinely have symptoms, and they need to look into that. The reason I said this video is about human error is because I think both sides could learn from this. I see this as a genuine mistake where you believe you're doing the right thing and trying to spread awareness and also helping people with actual mental disorders, but it's more so a situation of doing the wrong thing for the right reason. And yes, I believe that a lot of people do fake disorders on the internet. I have no doubt that they exist, especially because people are trying to find anything to point out about their identity and make that their whole personality trait. There are absolutely a bunch of people who just want to label themselves as OCD and waltz around and tell everybody that when they're not actually. But I think a lot of them are also either just undiagnosed or genuinely confused, or they could actually have it, as we were saying, but we just don't know for sure. So we can't make really bold assumptions and claims about certain people who post about their issues and their mental disorders and claim that they don't actually have it when we don't know that for sure. And we don't really have any proof that they're lying either, because again, different symptoms isn't as solid as proof as we would like it to be, because symptoms can vary. So to the YouTubers' criticisms, I understand a lot of them have very good intentions, but I feel like they might have overlooked the fact that they could be accusing people of lying when they could actually have a mental disorder, even if it's not the one that they assume that they have. Because the thing is, mental disorders symptoms can also overlap. So they may not have ADHD, but maybe they have anxiety or something like that. Like they could have something. And I understand that a lot of these YouTubers also have mental disorders themselves. So again, they're trying to kind of advocate for people like them, be like, you shouldn't be making light of our issues. Like I think a lot of them are genuinely passionate about this, and they have good intentions behind what they're doing. I don't want this to be a case where like, oh, these YouTubers are just post things for money. That argument is always really interesting to me, because it's like, Yeah, but doesn't everybody do everything mainly for the money? I'm just saying, like, a lot of y'all probably work a job you really don't want to, but why are you there? For the money, because you need money to live. So, no, I'm not saying that, like, YouTubers should exploit their workers for money. But I'm saying, like, finding a trending topic and then talking about it, especially if it pertains to you in a way, that's natural. That's whatever, like, that's gonna happen. So I don't necessarily think that they're all just doing it just for the money and the views. I mean, essentially, you want your content to do well anyway. But we just need to be careful about what we assume about other people, especially on the internet. And be careful not to make those assumptions a fact. You can assume all you want. You can judge. I said this in my other video. You can assume, you can judge. There isn't a single person on this earth that doesn't. And as much as you'd like to think you're above everyone for, oh, I would never judge a person, I don't do that to other people. Yes, you do. You're lying to yourself and everyone else. Every single person judges, every single person assumes. That is just human nature. So it's fine if you look at people on the internet and think, I think they might be faking it. That's a valid opinion. You can think that. But until you know for sure, I wouldn't suggest like going around calling them out and saying blatantly that you are lying and falsely accusing them when you could be wrong. Yeah, and that's all for my TED Talk today. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.